So not too tired from Mexico?
No, it's fine. I slept for 12 hours.
Oh, good. Ivan Krastev. In Bulgarian, it's Krastev or Krastev?
In Bulgarian, it's Krastev.
Krastev.
Krastev. In Bulgarian, Krst is cross.
Cross, yes. So you attended a conference in Mexico, right?
Yeah. It was an interesting conference because in 1990, it was in the August of 1990, Octavio Paz, the great Mexican poet and thinker, so he invited people like Czesław Miłosz and Kolakowski and so on, okay. So they have been talking about the new time coming, and now 35 years later, basically, okay. We have a similar conference, and it's, of course...
That's lovely. Does this still exist, the idea of Central European intellectual or public intellectual?
The public space is changing dramatically. So from this point of view, even if it exists, it's not the same. Before, it very much, which was typical for the Central European intellectuals, was that he was a man of letters.
Right.
And the Central European intellectual was very much a figure which was attached to a culture, understand the society of readers. And now what we see is basically people are much more listening to podcasts, people watching YouTube. So we have this kind of a shift from a written word to a visual, to a kind of an oral conversation. So from this point of view, certain type of a specificity of the way you understand world and politics come from where you're born. Listen, history does not disappear overnight.
But it doesn't mean that there will be no more intellectuals, right?
Yeah, they're simply going to be different expressions. They're going probably to tell differently, but this is not the type of a classical figure that, you know.
So is this the, I would say, the dawn of Central European intellectualism? Is it something which is closely linked to the cultural history of this region?
Yeah, because in a certain way, this was a very specific story. And I do believe Kundera got it right, because particularly the very idea of the Central European intellectuals was that we have been the other Europe, in many ways much more committed to the European legacy than Western Europe itself, constantly in a talk with certain type of East, particularly represented by Russia, the famous Kundera-Brodsky talks and so on. So there was a lot of intensity, but also to a certain extent, Central European intellectual was very much the product of the communist regimes, where the communists made the writers very important because the communist ideology was very much about words. And making the writers big enemies, you're making them important. So from this point of view, if we're going to see the return of the Central European intellectual, there's going to be much more contribution.
For you, the idea of nostalgia is very important in the way you are thinking about the political action. You said that it's a very important tool today, and even in Central Europe, maybe mostly in Central Europe, how to contribute to make people more emotional in a political way of behavior. Are you sure about the role of nostalgia in such an important way as you presented it in your text?
One of the important things that has happened, and I don't believe this is only Central and Eastern Europe, is that the future becomes problematic. People start fearing the future. Different people for different reasons. There was, by the way, a famous American science fiction story where people can travel in time. And one of the famous touristic destinations was that people are traveling ahead in order to see the end of the world. But when they're coming back, they were telling different stories. So, but one of the things that happened is that suddenly people start to fear the future. Some fear because of the climate and saying, listen, they're not going to be life on Earth in a certain period of time. Others, for demographic reasons, probably they're going to be life on Earth, but they're not going to be any one of us. Before future was a dream, suddenly future became a nightmare. And if you go in the world of literature, you're going to see to what extent most of the science fiction today is dystopian.
Do you think that some prophetic, let's call them prophetic, like working title, authors like Jacob Taubes or Spengler were right when they were writing about the eschatological dimension of the end of European civilization?
George Steiner has a famous essay called The Idea of Europe. And he's comparing, of course, in his mental mind, he was somebody born in Europe, in Vienna in the 1930s, then went to France, then went to the United States to become a very important cultural figure. But when he's comparing Europe, he said, what is distinctive for Europe? One is all these coffee shops in which people read newspapers, they plot conspiracies, they talk about revolutions. And then Europe is a place for pedestrians. You go on the streets, you're walking. Unlike in the United States, and when you're walking, you're always walking on the streets that have the names either of writers or generals. But then he said one of the important characteristics of Europe is a sense of ending. Unlike the Americans, Europeans have the sense of finality. They believe that something is going to end. I do believe probably this has something to do with the World War I and this idea of a great catastrophe, this apocalyptic kind of an ending. I have the feeling that this apocalyptic vibe can be found in different places. You can see it very much, for example, on the American right, for example, Silicon Valley. People like Peter Thiel and others, which are very much in a very strong Catholic apocalyptic tradition. So you have this, and of course you have people like Taup and others. And this is exactly because future is a very important institution in society.
Well, you told that we are more afraid of future than of the past, right? This is one of your great political theses.
But don't forget, because the past, nevertheless, how bad it was, we always managed to recover. We always managed to come back. And this was, by the way, the charm of the cyclical understanding of history, where you believe that, okay, something is ending, but you're starting from the beginning. You have this nostalgia. Secondly, nostalgia gives you a certain type of certainty. We have been talking a lot about, for example, migration, people coming to our countries. But these days, the movement in space is becoming the movement of time. So when people are coming, for example, from Africa to Europe, they're not simply believing that they're crossing physical borders. They do believe that they're coming to the future. On the other side, when people are voting for the far-right parties in Europe, they're also a type of immigrants, that they want to go back to a society that has disappeared.
Your friend, the great Bulgarian novelist, Gospodinov, he published a great novel which is called Time Shelter. And it exploits this, this problematic idea of nostalgia, but keeping the places and the time in a very static and precise context of his psychiatric hospital. So is it something which is now very popular or fashionable? The idea of exploring the nostalgia thing, the future thing?
Very much. Listen, the very idea of nostalgia, and particularly critical view on nostalgia, came up in the 1970s. Because as you know, in general, the idea of nostalgia is coming from the 17th century. There was a Swiss doctor who was the first one who coined the term. And nostalgia was about this strange disease that they believe the Swiss mercenaries has when they are far away from their places, and they have these ghosts coming to them, and there was this kind of a bad mood. And it was really identified as disease. The funny story is that in the 1970s, the idea of nostalgia was very much introduced by people who are specialists on the future. People like Toffler. And suddenly they start to criticize nostalgia as the way to try to basically confront modernity. The interesting, and Gospodinov's novel is, in my view, an absolutely brilliant example of this, is these days psychiatrists treat nostalgia not as a disease, but as a cure.
Práve ste dopozerali prvú časť videopodcastu, ktorá je zdarma pre všetkých. Ak si chcete pozrieť celý diel, môžete tak urobiť zakúpením si predplatného, čím nás zároveň podporíte v tvorbe ďalšieho kvalitného obsahu. Urobiť tak môžete na našom webe hovoríme.eu alebo priamo na platforme Hero. Za vašu podporu vám ďakujeme.